Hey, it's Eric from Mustang Island State Park, and today we're standing near the jetties. And so we want to talk about habitats and ecosystems a little bit with you. And one of these habitats is the jetties itself. Now, it is a man-made structure, but it still provides a lot of habitat resources and places to hide for little fish and crabs, which draws in the bigger fish, which is why when people are here visiting the park, it's one of the more popular fishing spots. You can also fish right from the beach, but this is a great little spot. And if you're snorkeling in the summertime, you can see sea turtles swimming around the jetties, so that's pretty fun. So the jetty history is actually pretty interesting. So this was a natural pass created by a hurricane way back in the late 60s, early 70s, and they put the rocks there to keep that pass open. And they wanted the pass to be open because we have Corpus Christi Bay there, which can be a hypersaline lagoon, which means during periods of drought, the salinity rises. And so they wanted that water exchange to be flushing out Corpus Christi Bay. Well, what happened was in the early 80s, there was an oil spill down in Mexico near the Yucatan, and they knew that the ocean currents were bringing that oil up the coast, and if it had gotten through one of these passes into our fisheries, it would be pretty devastating for the fish populations there. And we all rely on fishing and recreation there in Corpus Christi Bay, so we wanted to maintain the health of that ecosystem. So there's the jetties. The rocks themselves come from the quarry in Marble Falls. So all of the granite in Texas, like at the Capitol building, it all comes from that same spot. And if you were to get up really close to the jetties, you would see little grooves in the rock. And that's the quarry marks. So what they do is they drill holes, they perforate the rock, and then they hit it with a hammer and a wedge, and they separate these little square cubes, which then go onto a train car, and then down to the Port of Corpus Christi, where they're loaded onto a barge, and an excavator with a thumb attachment places each rock individually. The funding kind of ran short back when they built these jetties, because they should be built out further out. And the idea behind that is that the longshore current during the summer, which is traveling mostly from south to north, when it hits this immovable object, it has nowhere to go, so it swirls around, and that is supposed to scour out the opening or to flush out the opening. And the hydrographic survey data that we had back then in the 70s wasn't that great. And like I said, the funding kind of ran short. So the channel will likely never be opened up, even during Hurricane Harvey, which hit in Rockport and Port Aransas, which means that the wind was blowing this direction during that hurricane. It was blowing from the west. And all the water that had piled up into Corpus Christi Bay exited through our parking lot instead of through this channel, which is kind of frustrating. So all the surfers that grew up surfing here, they really wanted to see that channel open because it changes the sandbar and it makes it better for surfing. However, the water all exited through that parking lot, and it caused a huge crater that TEKS had to come and fill in for us. So we're on Mustang Island, which is about 20 miles long. And then our nearest neighbor is Padre Island, which is the longest barrier island in the whole world. Not just America or Texas, but in the whole world. And between that island and the mainland is the Laguna Madre, which is a hypersaline lagoon, meaning that it can be extra salty during periods of drought. And there's only about 6 of those types of habitats in the world. So it's a really unique habitat. And barrier islands in general are pretty fascinating because they only occur on the trailing edge of a continent. So if you've ever heard of continental drift, the continents are very, very slowly moving. So if you look at all the west coast from California to Baja and even into Mexico, most of the west coast of America is a rocky coast. And most of the east coast is a barrier island type system. So that's pretty fascinating. And why does that happen? Do some research and look into it yourself. It's really kind of cool. But where does the sand come from? Geologists can actually look at the sand particles and determine the composition of all the different minerals and elements in that sand, and kind of give you an idea of what mountain range or what river system the sand comes from. So most of our sand has come from the Mississippi River Delta, and a lot of our sand is actually from when the Nueces River used to be a much larger river, and it used to dump tons of sand in, and also the Rio Grande River down on the Texas-Mexico border. So the sand locally is mostly from the hill country of Texas, kind of in the Uvalde area, and it's mostly comprised of quartz. So that's why our sand here is mostly kind of white or tan color. It's all the quartz in the sand, but it's also filled with iron ores like magnetite and hematite, and then a little bit of other kind of interesting little minerals like mica. And so yeah, if you look at the sand under a microscope, it's really kind of fascinating. And then the other thing is that the grains of sand are going to be heavier on the beach side, And then if you go to the bay side of the island, the grains of sand are much smaller and would be considered silt, and that's why it's so muddy and like clay on the bay side of the island, because the wind energy can move those smaller particles further across the island where it settles into the bay systems. So there you go, there's where the sand comes from and why this island is so special. Now, the other thing is that the sand has very little nutrients. So anything that washes up that's organic material like driftwood or seaweed is going to eventually decompose and create nutrients for the plants that grow in the dunes. Now, without those plants that grow in the dunes, we wouldn't have an island here, which is one of the main reasons why we don't allow trucks or 4x4 activity on the dunes, because their root systems are really delicate and they have to go really far down through that substrate to get to any fresh water. They also have very unique adaptations that allow them to prevent water evaporation or water loss. So some of them, their leaves are covered in this really fine hair that reflects the sunlight. Others have really thick leaves that can hold on to water, like a succulent or a cactus. And some of those plants are even edible. So if you're curious about that, come to one of my programs and you can learn all about edible plants. And we were just talking about dunes, and I wanted to show you something else about why the dunes are so important. We talked about how the plants grow here and they have really deep roots that are very delicate, so that they can reach the fresh water. They also have these adaptations like these little fuzzy hairs that reflect the sunlight off of them. And then some of them also have really thick leaves, kind of like a succulent that holds water inside of it. So there's lots of animals that are kind of dependent on these dunes. There are no native trees on this island, so everything that lives here is going to be crepuscular, which is a fancy word meaning active at dawn and dusk. It's kind of like nocturnal. So the animals that come out at dawn and dusk are doing that because they're avoiding two things. One is the very hot sun, and two is any aerial predators like hawks that might be swooping down to catch a gopher or a ground squirrel or one of the many little small rodents that live in the dunes. And the other thing is that you can see the evidence of life that lives beneath the ground all over the island. So the whole island is like an underground network of tunnels. So you have gophers, ground squirrels, ghost crabs, fiddler crabs, and there's the evidence right there, is this pile of sand from that hole that was excavated by a ghost crab. So these animals are really dependent on this soft substrate that's easy to dig in. They can get out of the sun and they can get away from predators. And we're here just south of the Fish Pass jetties. And what I was going to show you was all this driftwood that washed up a couple of weeks ago. Just all of a sudden, out of the blue, it washed up. And so where did it come from? Likely some heavy rains and flooding in the Mississippi area. So the Mississippi River Delta empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. Then the ocean currents bring it to us. It was once living, but now it's obviously dead. And so there are some animals that still depend on it while it's decomposing or once it's dead. So as it's floating around in the ocean, anything that's floating in the ocean will attract fish to it, and they'll use it as a hiding place to get away from predators. And then once it gets on the beach, it's going to start to decompose, and it's going to feed those plants that live in the dunes. Without the nutrients coming onto shore periodically, the sand itself has very little nutrients. So the plants that live in the dunes are really adapted. They have these really long, deep roots that grow to where the fresh water is. And they have some fancy adaptations that, like some little fuzz on the leaves that reflects the light and prevents water loss or evaporation. And then other plants have really thick, succulent style leaves that really kind of capture the water and hold it in place. So yeah, once it's on the beach, it's dead, and there's not really anything that's really using it, but as it was drifting in the water, it was a habitat by itself. Hey, it's Eric from Mustang Island State Park. So thanks for watching these videos. It really means a lot to us at all these parks. And hopefully you learned something from these videos and have a fonder appreciation of the resources available to you when you're visiting a state park. So when you visit a state park, be sure to look up the programs. Our program and our website will be listed down in the description. So thanks again for watching.